Hello,
Good
happy
afternoon.
Tuesday on an unusual day for these live videos.
Yes, it's a Tuesday, right?
Yes, that's
We're a little
true.
delayed
It's
on a couple of
Tuesday.
things, so we're basically putting together a couple of pieces that we were going to talk about last week, bringing it to this week, and it's going to be fun. I think there's some interesting things happening.
Yes, and some interesting things we're set to talk about and some developments that are underway that we're going to touch on.
And there's a couple of big ones that are actually coming out that everybody should kind of know about. So why don't we start with that? Hannah, what's the latest on
specifically one big development.
Yeah, it's specifically the one that's everybody's kind of been waiting for, and whether or not the wheel was going to affect it, some of the things. So you have some details on
For
that.
a few years now, yes, because it's been delayed 4 times, but it's now the Empire Outlets Mall is set to open on April 18th. That's going to be the grand opening with a ribbon cutting the day before on the 17th. And
What stores are going to be open? So just so you know, a couple of things about this is not everything is opening up.
It's in
So let's get
phases,
into
yes.
that.
So, well, actually, the board at Empire Outlets hasn't been very specific about what's going to open right away. They haven't really given a timeline for that, other than the fact that Nordstrom, which is the main, which is like an anchor tenant of the mall, is going to open July 4th. I know H&M is the second.
That would be Nordstrom Rack, right?
Yes.
Nordstrom Rack, which is a discount version.
Yeah, well, it's an outlet mall, so they're
Right.
all discount stores.
Right.
So it's going to be New York City's first outlet mall. A lot of us are excited to kind of see what's going to pan out with that. They're also going to have a parking garage of about 1,200 spaces, half of which is going to be reserved for commuter parking. So the Staten Island Ferry gets another commuter lot. And basically, it's going to have more than 100 designer outlet stores. An artisanal food hall called, I guess, Marketplace. It's just like it's Marketplace with no
it's like a
vowels. So
NASDAQ call signal.
That's how I'm going to pronounce it.
Yeah, it's like you know, it looks like on a ticker.
MRKTPL.
Right, which is Marketplace, but yeah. Almost done like a Wall Street ticker symbol.
Yeah,
so
that's
it's
true.
kind of like trying to get that, I guess, New York feel to it.
Yes.
The big thing is that this is 1 million square foot mall development. Okay.
Yep.
All that will be open up in phases. Now, to kind of put that in perspective, you're basically looking at something that's 4 times the size of the Staten Island Mall.
Still, even with the expansions.
Well, as of the last report, I don't
Yeah.
know what the expansions are, but if we kind of put this in perspective, it's a lot. We're talking a huge expansion of the commercial market.
In the most densely packed part of Staten Island. So.
Yeah, I mean, density, we've talked about this and whether density plays a role. I don't think density is going to be the issue for that place, and necessarily.
Well, I do think they're building up. I think there's going to be several floors because the actual space is probably smaller than the Staten Island Mall. How could it be any bigger?
I don't think it'd be on a vaster parcel. It's definitely on a smaller plot of land.
But there's going to be 6 buildings and 3,000 square feet of outdoor space in addition to the 1.1 million square feet inside.
Which is pretty. It's a pretty picturesque place. I mean, I think that when it's all said and done, I think some of the renderings that you can go online, if you go to the Empire Outlet site, you actually have some renderings out of this large-scale development, probably the biggest development in Staten Island history as of this moment. So that's set to take shape. The real question really becomes and we've mentioned this before, where do we stand in all with retail space being a little bit
pointing down. Yeah, his mic is like pointing at the floor. I don't know if that's affecting the sound at all.
You're probably used to hearing me yell because it's always close to my face. So
these are good at picking up directional noise. Anyway,
the good thing is that it's going to give Staten Islanders some options. It's also going to give, I think, a little bit of where the commercial real estate market's going to head, because more retailing space, when there's a glut of it currently available, where does this put this? Now, to kind of put that in perspective, The mall and a lot of the stores like Barnes and Noble, which is now vacant, is now moved into the new Staten Island Mall.
The old Barnes and Noble.
But
it
it's
was
also
vacant and it's half the size. I don't know if you've been to the new one.
Oh, right. So they have the size. So
Smaller.
it's much
The
smaller.
old one was 2 floors. This one's 1 floor.
And remains vacant. Now,
Yeah.
some of the things is that I think there's a drawdown in the commercial markets where retailers are occupying less space, less street space, using more internet-based sales. The question becomes, with this amount of kind of floor space being taken up by retailing, do we think this has an impact on overall the commercial markets? So that's the thing to kind of play out, and whether or not that wheel, the draw for this is actually going to be a thing that this
Strong.
Yeah, is the draw going to be strong enough? That's something you guys could weigh an opinion on. Do you think, or don't you think, having this much retail space on Staten Island is going to serve the purposes of Staten Island?
Staten Island does not have outlet retail, though.
Yeah, it doesn't have outlet retail.
So I think they're trying to differentiate
The
themselves
Amazon
by the fact that it's all discount merchandise and they're all
Right.
nice brands, such as Macy's and Nordstrom Rack,
Yeah.
Nike Factory Outlet.
I still have this
other
thing
one.
about the Amazon effect, where people's retailing habits have consistently grown online.
They
the
have
question
shifted.
is, there's 3 large developments, the Staten Island Mall being one of them, the Highland Commons, and now this. So we're not adding a significant amount more of population here, but we're adding a significant amount more retail space. So what does that mean for the markets? How do we think this is going to impact the marketplace? It's something to be seen over the next few years. But we think, if you have an opinion on it, weigh in on it and tell me, do you think it's going to work, or do you think it's one of those things that kind of sits in one of those situations that Staten Island's commonly known for, which is the idea is always bigger than the reality.
Well, it's definitely big.
And
it's going to be a reality, but will it pan out?
Will it pan out is the question.
Will it pan out? Yeah, in the sense that they're hoping that it will. In the sense that this budget of $304 million, including $47 million of taxpayer dollars, subsidies, will pan out.
It's a public-private partnership between New York City Economic Development Corporation and private industry. So it is, the land itself is owned by New York City, and they kind of work a deal with the city for the use of the land. Not that it's not a positive development. The question is it feasible? So that's something that is a wait and see. I believe to a certain degree it is. I don't know if 1 million plus square foot of retail space, that's a lot of space.
Look, it's important to say.
Hannah says she's going to be there every day.
Yeah,
She'll jog the mall if it serves any purpose other than shopping.
Yeah, well, we should open up a second office there, and I can just go shop after work.
That's it.
But it's important to say this idea that all malls are failing is not really true. There are malls that are thriving in this country. Probably not the majority of them. It's only the malls that innovate and create an experience for people to meet, and rather than focusing just on material things, good restaurants, good spaces to meet your friends, technology pop-ups, which I haven't really seen any of that. So I feel like maybe technology-wise, they could probably use a little more investment.
Yeah, I mean, it's just
smartphone pop-up spaces. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the retailing. When it comes to retailing, it's you go to parts of the country
the old
and some
model,
of the,
right? The old model of just
is,
selling women's clothing primarily is not really working anymore.
Yeah.
So the malls
definitely not working since the days that I have been involved. Since my youth, when I used to work in the mall.
Oh yeah,
I worked in a few. I worked in. I actually worked in.
Oh yeah, a Radio Shack.
I worked in Radio Shack. I used to work at a clothing retail outlet called Chess King.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, it was just it was a guy's clothing store. I was in high school, so it was cool for about a month. But the big thing is that whether or not we believe, and whether you guys believe, opening up retailing at this point in the game, that much retailing space, which is going to be incredible amount with Highland Commons, whether you think it's feasible or not, I'd love to hear an opinion or two on it. So if you have an opinion on it, weigh in on it. But the thrust of today's conversation is the real estate market. We kind of talked about the real estate market taking a dip last month.
Yeah.
Not a dip.
Not dipped, really. It's just for 6 months, really kind of just
Yeah,
flattened.
I don't call this a dip, because in the sense that home sale prices are still remain pretty solid.
Yeah, they're
It's a trailing
last year
indicator.
over about
We may see a
30,000.
little bit of movement, but I do see that the spring market's starting to thaw out, and it looks like there's a little bit more activity out there, and it looks like there's still we've seen things pick up a little bit more than I would expect if there was more of a significant downturn. Interest rates are still at that 4.6, but what our focus today is going to be around what these last 10 years have meant for the real estate market.
Yeah.
Both from, I guess, from a consumer side, the experience technology-wise, and how that's played a role in their real estate purchases, and also where the prices were and how they came about to
how
where we are
values
today.
have changed since the recession, which was 2008, 2009 really started to take hold, and then through this crazy climb over the last couple of years, and then to where we are now.
Yeah, and the interesting
how
thing
you've
is
been there for all of it.
Yeah,
so.
but the interesting thing was we've been doing reports like this for years through this whole entire time. So we've had almost at least a monthly report going back as far as at least 7 years of just how this kind of developed, and we've had an extensive amount of research behind this. So it's an interesting time, and this is an interesting conversation to see what 10 years has meant for the real estate market and for the way the market moves, which is changing quite rapidly, but I don't think as rapidly as some people had suggested it might.
Right.
So that's the big thing. So you have a couple of questions for me, and I know that you wanted to get to them. So
yes. So
hand them off.
So let's go back 10 years ago to 2009. You were selling real estate during the recession, and how was the real estate climate at that time? What was it like to sell real estate during the recession?
Okay. Well, actually, I started a little bit sooner than that, but that's okay.
No, you started in 06.
Yeah, 06, 07. So 07, obviously, the biggest thing with the real estate industry and the economy overall was the stock market crashed. Lehman Brothers fell apart. It was one of the largest investment institutions to ever land on its face.
And when did the stock market crash? Exactly.
September 2008. So September 2008 began a very, very dark path in a lot of things, in both the housing, mortgage, and financial industries all take a hit. Derivatives being at the head of that, credit default swaps, which funded bad loans, insured bad loans. IG, the insurance company, insuring a whole bunch of bad loans from many different industries. But these credit default swaps kind of tanked the market, and the high risk investments being bundled as good investments, AAA rated investments. When these mortgages were broken down into securities and thrown onto the stock exchange. So the biggest thing about what happened in 10 years is the plan to address the crisis and how it's kind of impacted these 10 years versus just your typical economy. Because I think one of the things when we look back at 10 years of real estate, we look at it in what kind of traditional metrics are being used up until 2008, but there's a lot of artificial metrics in this which kind of skew numbers a bit and kind of make this real estate market and the economy kind of like not follow traditional paths of the cycle. So back in 2008 when I started, 2006, I just began the process of getting into this. 2008 became the real panic. So basically at that time panic set in across the entire, from homeowners to investors. Panic set in. Basically I just remember everything stopping. Right after that, right after the stock market crashed in September, President Bush at the time came on the air, gave a profound speech that he needed to supply the banking system a quick infusion of cash before things locked up, and then we would have had a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. Yeah. So there was an infusion of money into the loans. What has happened since then is that the climate didn't necessarily improve much with some of these measures, so things kind of stood still. So a person on the market, just to kind of give you a difference, where now we're about 100 days, it rapidly rose from like maybe 100 days on the market to almost 200 days on the market.
Wow.
So as we,
And what did that cause prices to do?
Prices, I mean, from Staten Island perspective, prices never really dropped as much. Staten Island prices have been relatively stable.
Compared to the rest of the country.
Compared to the rest of the country. So
we were kind of unscathed, and a lot of that was propped up by foreign investments.
Right.
Like
so
Chinese
just to kind of put it into perspective, the average sale price at the market height was in the 470s, 480s. So even at the height, it was only at the 470s. It dropped to as low as 385 back in 2010.
That's wild.
So that was about $100,000 off of the average sale price was the first real.
But 200,000 less than right now, which is
200,000 less than right now, right? So the drop off was pretty significant, but the recovery, I think, when you talk about it in terms of the what we call the velocity of money, I think with the digital age and the way things, how quickly money moves, it wasn't as long as that as many people would suggest it would be before things recovered. So the velocity of money, the fact that capital could move at a much quicker pace, softens the blow on a lot of these things. So it's called the velocity of money for the people who are an economics major. You know what that means. So the speed at which the money moves actually helped or improved the conditions of the real estate market much more quickly. So, which really led
about what time?
So you're talking about from 2008 to 2012 was the 2010 being the worst, the bottom. So it bottomed out.
The year I graduated college.
Yeah, the absolute bottom of the market
rough.
was 2010. So just to kind of put in perspective, you take a listing on a house, you wouldn't expect to close on a listing on a house for a year, almost a year. So you went on the market, you could expect that by the time you hit closing date, it would be a year from the day you signed the contract. So that's a long time for the real estate. So what it became is a significant buyer's market. Buyers were the key to being in the business. So my first 17 deals in real estate were focused around just buyer deals. Having listing inventory and people who are in the real estate industry was not a priority as much as it's made today. It was like, okay, you have 60 listings, selling one of them and having homeowners frustrated very quickly was a problem. The big thing about it was the next piece is technology began to implement itself around the same time. 2010, 2008, Zillow was in the pre-public stage, so it was in its initiating stages. So technology also kind of took off around the same time that the real estate market tanked, which was an interesting part of the whole entire process of real estate. So the market tanked, technology changed, so there's a lot of shifts in how the business moved.
So do you think that helped with recovery at all, that we had more technology at our fingertips?
Well, I think the interesting thing is just it changed the concept. So anytime you have downturns, I think a lot of things change in any industry. It's a force to relook at what wasn't working as well or what wasn't efficient. Similar to like how the gas crisis brought about car sales, or domestic car sales kind of fell drastically on the and imports like Honda and Toyota began seeing the first phases into in the 70s into the United States. So it forced change, and that's not always easy. For a lot of companies to adjust, for agents who've been in the business for a long time, adjust. So it was an adjustment. It was an adjustment phase in the market, but it also brought about opportunity. So people who are more tech savvy or into the tech savviness of real estate, it was changing around this time. But and you know, we're part of that change when we started. But the big thing is that technology became a very significant role in how the business moved. But that whether it happened to help the real estate market at all, no, I don't think it had any impact on whether the sales were going to be increased or whatever. The efficiency of the market increased. I think the sentiments far outweighed any adjustments technology-wise, at least at that time.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, we talked about the recession, the banks nearly failing, and then what ensued in the following years. So talk about, now we're in the recovery, let's say
2011,
12. Well, 2013 is when things
really
were pretty healthy at the time.
I would say the beginning of the recovery started just about 2011. Mm-hmm. It was the beginning. It was the beginning of the upswing. So if you go back to the stats,
really that soon? So it was only really 2 years that
it was only about 3 years that it took before the market started beginning its recovery. A lot of things were put in place, just so you know, a lot of things were put in place in those 10 years. One was the home buyer tax credit. So in 2010, 2009, 2010, home buyers were given a window of time to get I believe it was a $4,500 tax credit in the purchase of a house, which actually did help increase sales significantly for that period of time. The problem is that after that expired, it caused another dip in the market. It was like an incentive piece that the United States government kind of put into action.
Right, but they couldn't afford to do that forever.
Right, it's really interesting that it was the first time in history that a first-time homebuyer tax credit was issued for the purchase of real estate to prop it up. It didn't even extend to that. They also extended the tax credit to car purchases during this time. This is an unprecedented time in the United States history in terms of government intervention into the marketplace. But there are some drawbacks to this, and we'll get into that in a second.
Well, what would those be?
Well, let's get into the recovery phase and when that began, because I think that was the next.
Okay, so recovery phase began in 2011, you said, but really started to pick up in 2012, 2013.
Yes.
And how fast were homes selling during this time?
Okay, so this is when, like, what I used to call the Mendoza line. I always had a Mendoza line, meaning if you guys are baseball fans, 200. A batting average of 200 was considered the Mendoza line. So 200 sales. There was under 200 sales happening in the market quite frequently. Wow. It would just keep, you're lucky you get 200 sales in a month for matter of fact, I think it was February 2010 where there was only like 120 home sales on Staten Island for one given month. So the impacts of this across the industry. Brokerages obviously shuttered. A lot of people got out of business. It was not an easy time for anybody who was in this business to even exist. So, but as the recovery started, believe it or not,
were you full time at that time?
Yeah, I was on the tech side of things. Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing was that tech was evolving. I was evolving more in the tech arena of real estate, where the change was happening. So I was attracting those people into it, whether it was through blogging or the website.
And that was before people were really doing that stuff.
Yes,
you kind of got in on the ground level.
I was like the pioneer for that when I started. So it kind of just changed the dynamic. So I talk about the issues that we're talking about on a regular basis. I write about them. I'd write about my experiences of how things kind of play out in the market, and people read it. And before I knew it, I'd be getting calls left and right about how to sell in this market or
Yeah,
how
because
to buy.
that was valuable information they probably
Right,
weren't
at that
getting
time.
anywhere else.
Right. It was just the marketplace was changing, so I kind of accommodated that change. But in 2012, Hurricane Sandy strikes in 2012, and
November.
a lot of people,
October, right?
October.
Halloween.
Yeah, it was just before Halloween. I think it was the 29th of October. The market absolutely stalls out. Now the question is, what happens to the real estate market then, and what does that do? The big thing is that it changes dramatically. For a very short period of time, for almost a month, almost nothing takes place in the marketplace. Panic sets in. Does it make Staten Island a little bit less desirable? It's on CNN. Not the greatest press as far as
Right.
houses being washed away. It's things like that. But as it turns out, 2012 was a really significant time because actually, shortly after Hurricane Sandy, things picked up dramatically. So we're talking about houses typically going under 200. By the time we get into June of that year, we're already pushing over 300 sales in a month in 2012. So my thing was that it was changing, but it was changing rapidly for the better. There was an equilibrium in the marketplace starting to set up, which made it like an equal buyer-seller market, and the robustness of having a considerable amount of houses on the market, a ever-growing buyer pool, really.
And the fact that prices were only about 400,000, so
so the affordability was there.
Yeah.
Some of these incentives kind of played out. Interest rates were below 4%.
For a long time.
During that time, so. And that's unprecedented. 3.5%. We were pulling mortgages down at that point. So it was really a perfect positive storm for the real estate market, and to be honest with you, it's chugged up since. So 2012 was really a pickup point. Things started improving in the economy generally, but the biggest problem was that prices and pricing, and where the issue becomes the issue that I said may become an issue later on is the cheap money that was available to purchase homes, the fundamentals of some of the way the market was moving based on infusion of capital into Wall Street, that this could lift asset prices quite significantly, meaning that it's not so much people were actually seeing value increases. The numbers were more reflective of inflationary pressures than it was actually value. So they were actually losing money in their pocket, but their asset values were increasing if you owned a house at the time. So it wasn't like things were getting necessarily better, but the way they structured a lot of these plans was that they were infusing money into the system consistently to prop it up. But in essence, it's not an earning capacity of money, which really is where the market makes its kind of strength. Is the earning capacity of the borrower is really the determining factor. It was a pressure to keep rates extremely low, cheaper money, cheaper borrowing costs, a little more qualified buyers anyway. There was a lot more stringent buyers at that time, requirements added to the Dodd-Frank was one of them. So there was a lot more, a lot more ways that the U.S. government was propping up the real estate industry to kind of get higher values for homeowners, so it wouldn't drop off too drastically. And not for nothing, the banks were under an extreme amount of pressure to keep values at a certain rate, or the banking system may have failed completely. So there was a lot of inflationary pressure on the market, which set up, I think, a little bit of asset inflation. And I think that some of the experience of some of the house rising now have to do a lot with asset price rises versus just value wise, because the other fundamentals like the job market in terms of producing more income, and the jobs that's not why prices rose. If you look at the history of this, is that you would assimilate increase in salaries to increase in rise in house prices. That's the underlying factor in creating house value.
But for the last few years, that hasn't
Right.
been
So,
the case.
and the issue becomes is in these 10 years, there's a lot to be learned from it. I do think that, it'll simmer down. I think we may be finally at the end of like all the measures kind of weighing themselves out now, and things of the pressures of all that infusion of capital is starting to lessen, and now it's more fundamentals. So, and while it's not better for the entire real estate market, it's definitely a better footing than it was back 10 years ago. So I think that now we could move on to a much more fundamental market than kind of all these outside pressures forcing prices to change a bit.
Right, which outside pressures, I guess, meaning foreign
U.S.
investments.
government, U.S. government pressures to keep the rates down, quantitative easing,
Okay.
and then of the last few years, foreign investment has obviously played a role, specifically in economies like
In
New York.
pushing prices up.
Yeah.
New York is the main market in the country. It's kind of their market of choice
Yes.
for investing. But again, that's changing. That's pulled back 90% from its peak. So that explains a lot of the fact that prices are not dropping, but they're flattened. They're not going up.
Yeah, well, that will mean that the markets will rest itself on more fundamentals than it ever has. So it's like, are there jobs? Are people, instrumental in the local economy as part of their, their place of employment, than just more speculative investment. Mm-hmm. So you get to more fundamentals, I think, at the end of the day. So that's really the key here, is that the market is going to a much more fundamental place than it's ever been. Some people don't like that, but the reality is it's actually better long term for that to happen, because you get less of these swings, and house prices were definitely rising at a rate that it currently is not very affordable.
So let's talk about that timeline of, I guess, about 2 years, probably from 2015 to 2017. We saw prices go up, $150,000, $200,000 on average. So what was it like selling houses during that time?
Okay. Well, there's two very key factors in the real estate market that really we need to look at. One being inventory was squeezed to a point where the market pressure was definitely putting a huge amount of capital for very few houses to be bought. So you have this very high demand side push. Mm-hmm. The supply side of this is basically out of line. So you have and this is the strangest thing in the real estate economy that you could kind of put into play, because this is the first time in really history you have an inclining market and a decreasing inventory. This is kind of unprecedented in real estate. Usually there is a subsequent rise in inventory with an improving market. That did not happen this time. So with this influx of buyers and the squeeze placed on the amount of inventory, because a significant amount of houses still remain underwater from 10 years ago. Even today, there are still houses that are overborrowed, and they can't sell because a, the cost of selling is X amount, b, their income doesn't satisfy the ability to move, or their credit's been ruined. So it's like, where do people go? So I think in these last 2 years, the run-up really has to do with the squeeze in the inventory and the amount of available buyers that there are in the marketplace. So, and as we see, people honestly slower. It was a lot slower in terms of people responding to the real estate market with adding more inventory to it, where they felt more positive about selling their house. But now it's kind of balanced itself out, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that balancing out. There's more of an equilibrium here. So the real question is, in that 2015 to 2017, is the inventory squeeze was really the key playing factor in why prices rose as much as they did. And like I said, a lot of it is still a shakeout of the Great Recession. The Great Recession's going to be, at the end of this, it's going to be, a 20-year, I believe, the effects of this will last 20 years, provided we learn the lessons. I don't know if we did. We debate about this, but I don't know if all the lessons were learned, but that if we don't go back to that situation. But, we do have to plan for cycles, because these things do run in cycles, so you can't have an ever-increasing real estate market. Any market, period. There's no such thing as a market that constantly is on the upswing. It's ups, it's a cycle. Business cycle, economic cycle.
Economic cycle, yeah.
It's a natural course of, that's nature in anything related to economics.
And you've told me before that the real estate market tends to really stay in tandem with the stock market.
Yes. I mean, the correlations can't be dismissed. So it's kind of odd that the stock market's basically plateaued, right? I mean, it hasn't. Mm-hmm. It's gone down,
about
dropped.
The same.
Yeah, so it's like the real estate market is almost a mirror image of what's going on Wall Street. So when the stock market drops quite significantly, people get panicked about the economy. It's kind of like there's a cause and effect relationship between what's happening on Wall Street to a person's personal job security, where they're questioning whether or not, the economy's not doing good. Maybe I should wait a little bit, see if my job situation isn't going to change, and I'll move forward once things stabilize a little bit. So there's these drawbacks based upon news that's coming out of Wall Street. And it's a correlation is really amazing. It's profound when you look at the numbers between Wall Street and the real estate market. I mean, traditionally it has, but I mean, like I said, information moves so quickly now. Yeah. The correlations happen very quickly.
So if you kind of want to have your pulse on what's going on with the real estate market, you definitely need to kind of follow the financial markets as well.
The financial markets are a good harbinger of, at least at this point, we have enough information and data to suggest that there's some good evidence that the Wall Street has moved in tandem with the real estate market. So I would look at that and draw some distinctions about we're in the plateau. The same thing. The Wall Street's been around 25,000, 26. It's been as high as 28.
Did it?
Yeah, I think it's 27, close to 28. And it's been up and down, but relatively flat. So it's something that I think in the 10-year cycle, this is being the last phase of this. I believe we're in the last phases of getting out or shaking loose of all the measures that were the old, what I call the recession market, where artificial pressures are being removed out of the marketplace and things are kind of left to the marketplace to adjust to.
Okay.
It's we're getting really complicated today.
Well, yeah, no.
It's a rather complicated subject, and the economics of it is really what the crux of this is. Obviously, the economics is something I've studied quite a bit of. So,
right.
We're trying to give you a kind of an outlook on fundamentals as part of making a decision. So no, I didn't want to lose anybody, and I kind of wanted to bring it back to the present. So we basically prices are doing this a little bit, but they've kind of stayed around 580,000 for about the past 6 months. So seeing as that's the case, days on the market are up higher than they've been in 3 years. Inventory's way up since last year. But where do you kind of see it in the next few months heading? The market? I think when we say way up, I think it's not a bad thing to have some of these things way up, because I think these were the market pressures that were creating some real issues with pricing. So I'm going to say that when we say inventory's up just to a little over 6, which is. Now I'm telling you, at one time, at 6 months sounds like
it's 7 months now.
Yeah, close to 7, right?
No, it's over 7.2, I think.
Well, just think at one time it was 16 months.
Wow.
or close to 20 months.
And this is months inventory that we're talking about.
So just in the 10 years, we're talking about months inventory going from as much as it would take 20 months to clear out a market till you're still at 6. We're in good shape when you compare it to the worst of the the market back then. So I think people need to draw back and say, oh, things aren't as healthy. I think they.
But it was around 3 months in the last few years.
I
think,
mean, it was under 3 months. It was. I think it got as close to almost 2.5 months. So I mean, but the drawdown on the market has to do with the increase in inventory. It's not. People are getting a little bit more engaged in the prospects of moving. Things have stabilized to the point where people feel comfortable to move because their economic situation's improved. Things generally in the economy haven't changed much. So people, they're looking at some of the more fundamental aspects of moving, but they don't feel as much strain upon their job as they may have felt, when the recession first started. So, people are more encouraged to go onto the market. The real question is the reality is going to meet the needs, and that's where, in some cases, it might. Depending on the locales, we basically said that nobody on Staten Island is on equal grounds or equal footing value-wise, because certain neighborhoods are definitely accelerating much quicker than others.
Yes.
So it's
a tale of two markets.
Yeah, it's a tale of multiple markets.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that in play. But I think in the current year, I think we should basically be looking at just a stabilized situation. I don't see things basically jumping up higher or lower. I think we'll be in this phase for a while as a lot of the dust settles from. We're going back 10 years. I believe this is the final shakeout of it. We need to we'll be paying attention in the next few months to see what's kind of happening and see exactly how the real estate markets, is this decline continuing, to the extent at which it will continue. I don't think, based on some preliminary information, that we're in anything anybody needs to worry about. The fundamentals are pretty good, so I'm not concerned in the least.
So I guess, is that a good note to end on, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of rehash that in 10 years, take the news with a grain of salt when you look at this and you say, from where we were to where we are now, that the panic, we need to get out of the panic ideas. Everything seems to move on panic ideas. Oh, it's a buyer's market. We're back to 2006, 2007, 2008.
Yeah,
we're not
really.
there. We're not even close to that.
It's its own thing. You can't really compare.
But we're in a cycle, and I think it's part of the regular cycle of real estate, and it's part of what we'll do. What will be, a dip here and there, a rise here and there, and the cycle is continuing. It's a healthy part of the marketplace. So I don't think having a dip is a bad thing. The market will settle up where it needs to settle up.
Yeah, sellers shouldn't be afraid because
values
are not going down.
Yeah, I don't think sellers or buyers. I think they're
just not really
we're in
accelerating.
the fairest
anymore.
of marketplaces than I've seen in a while. So I think buyers have definitely a little bit better opportunity. Prices aren't rising at anywhere near they were just 18 months ago.
Yeah, they're not rising. They're
so it's like it's kind of staying where they are. Inventory keeps coming up, but like I said, you need to pay attention to fundamentals of moving than necessarily the economics as a whole. So a lot of people make a decision that the market's down 5% or the market's down 3% or 2%. You're talking about $3,000 for the sake of living with two kids in a one-bedroom house. So I mean, it's like those types of decisions. Obviously, scoring big and winning big when you're moving from one place to another is generally relatively safe. So, and that's pretty much it for that.
Yeah. So I feel like I learned something today. I hope you guys did.
Yeah, definitely a little bit more technical today.
But yeah, I mean, not more technical than our stats videos.
Yeah, I thought it was a little bit more.
Well, it was a lot of stats.
Everybody
videos
got a little preview of economics of real estate in essence. But it's always fun and it's always exciting. And I hate things. I felt more like a professor today, like teaching a class. It could be dry. Definitely not as exciting as some of the other stuff that we've done. But the big thing is that when you're going out there and getting a professional, make sure they know what the hell they're doing.
Ask them these questions, the kind of things we've
Yes.
been talking about. You know,
And they'll give
they
you the
should
right
have
answers.
some idea. If not, you know, all the bills that were passed 10 years ago, but you know, they should kind of understand where the market's at, what it's been doing for the last 6 months, year.
And if you go back to our YouTube channel, you can actually watch them.
Yes, all the stats videos, exactly.
We all look a little bit younger too.
Yeah, from
you
the
get
from
to see
2013.
you get to see Hannah at the pre-30.
Be careful. Be careful.
God forbid we reveal her age that she's so ancient.
Yes. Well,
Um,
no, you pretty much did because.
I know it's rough being at your age.
Yes.
Anyway,
No,
it's
not
nice
really.
to see everybody, and if anybody has a question, wants to weigh in an opinion, we look forward. And the guy with the horn is absolutely
Is
excited
out of
about
his
us
mind.
getting out of the off the camera. So anyway,
grief.
have
Okay,
a great
yes.
night, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Seeing you next week.
Okay.
All right.
Until then.
Till then.
Ciao.
Ciao.